Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda YouTube podcast show, powered by citiesabc.com and businessabc.net. We continue profiling global personalities, global doers, and especially the ones that actually bring a bit more of hope to the world, inspiration, and they do things that actually can change society, cities, and businesses. And on this series, we've been always looking at personalities that actually bring the best out of us and as well inspiring us to move forward in the best path and the best directions. Today, I'm quite excited to interview someone that I know for a while and someone that has been inspiring me in a lot of different directions, both the well-being part, the spiritual part, but as well the sports and the way we look at the way you do the things related with our physical, with our visuals, and as well how we integrate all the elements, or I call it sports economy or well-being economy, but as well in terms of the organizations of sports that actually make the world a better place in terms of competition in an healthy way, but as well events and organizations around how we take this forward. So I welcome to our series Ursula Romero. Ursula is a personality, I would say, that you cannot put in a box because she is a very multidisciplinary lady, a creator, and that is a TV and film director with 2 decades of experience in the media and broadcasting industry. She is as well a very creative personality that looks at histories, adventures, and the bridge between visual, film, and all the areas of sports, but as well cultural backgrounds and nuances around the people and cities and society. She is the managing director of the International Sports Broadcasting Company, ISB, which for people listening to us is one of the biggest, probably the biggest streaming, not streaming, but video producing and events data room parts of when you see big sports events around the world. And she continued the tradition of her own father, and the ISB is probably more well known internationally as the host broadcasting company for the Olympic Games and other major sports events worldwide. Under Ursula leadership, ISB continued and brought a lot of new innovation to feed cinematic cameras and plug and play workflow during the a lot of world sports events like the World Karate Federation, Budapest World Championship, and a lot of other sports events like the World Games and other things we're going to be talking today. Ursula is as well a filmmaker that has a huge experience in the film industry, both as a creator, as a director, and as well as a personality that has been working in post-production for different films and special documentaries. For the 2015, for instance, European Games in Baku, she received the innovative use of mini HSSM cameras award at the Sportstel Award ceremony for her work as producer and director for various sports such as the beach volleyball, BMX, cycling, road, triathlon, and swimming. So she combines a huge technical capacity with filming, documentary, and industry cutting-edge innovation around the sports filming and the sports documentary. She is part of the Global Sports Federation, GEF, and she serves on the GEF Digital Technology Innovation Commission and the GEF Cultural Focus Group. Ursula is a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Utah in Film Arts and Video Studies, and she's also a graduate of the London Film Academy, holding a master's degree in cinematography and film, video, and production. I would say that she's one of the most resourceful ladies in the sports industry, well-being, and as well in the film world. So I'm very excited to welcome her. She's as well a good friend that I've been quite excited to share a lot of moments and adventures, and hopefully much more in the future. And as well as a note, she's as well continuing the work of her father, there was one of the biggest personalities in sports and in the television broadcasting industry worldwide. And we're going to be talking about that today in this interview. So, Ursula, welcome to our series.
Thank you. Well, good morning, good day. That was a very
Well,
nice introduction. Thank you.
well, there's a lot of things because you have really so much different personality angles, and as well a variety and diversity and the wealth of experiences. And as well, I would say that there's like multiple personalities on you. There's the adventurer, the filmmaker, the broadcaster, the producer, which is quite amazing and as well quite difficult to manage in this modern world. So I want to start, and I mentioned about your father. I want to talk about your background, your education. I know that you had a fantastic experience of multi-experience between different countries, traveling with your father and your family, but as well learning different cultures and different areas that are particularly beautiful as a storytelling, but as well in terms of wealth of life, and that made you who you are today. So if you could tell us a bit about your history from your basis.
Well, as you said, it sounds a little crazy. And actually, when my mom and I speak about it, because we talk about it quite a lot, about what we've done, where we've been. And I think the other day we were doing the numbers. And as a family, I believe that we moved house and country 9 times. So we're a little bit like army brats, we moved around. And the first time that we packed up and left our house was when I was 4, because my father had been engaged for the first time ever by an American network, a foreigner, a Spanish person, was hired to become the CEO of the entire broadcast operation for the Olympics in 1984 in LA. So as you can imagine, CEO from ABC Sports back then, hiring a little Spanish guy to do the whole operation was a pretty big deal. So we moved in 1982, we moved to LA, which obviously for a 4-year-old was amazing, because we had beaches, Disneyland, Marine World, and all the 80s in the US, which was awesome. So that's when the adventure started, and I participated for the first time in the Olympics. Obviously not working, but it was really amazing because I remember going to all these competitions and seeing all these amazing athletes, and of course LA in the 80s was something special. I remember the opening ceremony with all the doves flying, and it was just very special. And from then on, we just kind of moved around every 2 or 3 years. And not only was it quite stressful for my mother, because most of the time it was me and her on our own doing the move, but it was also amazing, because, as you can imagine, we had to learn to get to know a city very quickly, and also you get to learn a culture and the whole place, in a very sort of intimate way. So we kind of got used to moving around and absorbing all these different cultures. And I think apart from it being very fun, for me at least, I think it also, opened my mind to different cultures, to not even considering differences in people, and just being very open and very happy to adapt quickly to new situations. So I think that was my biggest learning, thanks to my parents. And then, of course, being such a small family and being so close to my dad, I was very much involved with the Olympic movement very early on. And I was being taken to a lot of, I grew up really quickly around adults, which I think gave me a little bit of advantage at the end of the day, which again, I'm very grateful to my parents for having done that. So when people say to me now, oh, I don't know, should I take my kid out of school? Should I move? Is it good for the children? I'm like, you know what? The more influences, the more experiences a child has, the better, because you learn how to be in the world especially today with a world that's moving so quickly. I think the more you get thrown into the deep end, the better. So not only did I learn to be part of the adult world, but I also learned languages really fast. And like I said, I think I kind of just, like Asterix or Obelix falling into the pot, of the sport Olympic world. I kind of fell into the pot as well, and I grew up with it. So I didn't really have much choice. I think from wanting to be a veterinarian for a very short period of time to then working for the first time when I was 16 on a sporting event, it just kind of became part of my DNA, I guess. So that was sort of our upbringing.
That's very special and very unique because, of course, that you mentioned a lot of places, a lot of different cultures. So I have one personal question that is very important for me. So from all these different cultures, and for instance, from Spain, there is a very strong culture, and yes, of course, your mother is German, your father is Spanish, and from Spain to the US and then Latin America and a lot of different places where you live in the world. How did you process all these different cultural registrations that are part of you, but as well sometimes very difficult to mix? And I would like to touch this because for people listening to us, I think one of the biggest challenges, like you said, in a very challenging, changing world, is how we adapt to the different cultures, the different personalities that we share, especially in the digital world. But most of people live only in one culture, one language, one location, and you, just from the tender young years, were already living in multiple countries.
I think about it a lot because obviously the digital world is here. Um, and sometimes I wonder whether it's good or not. And, obviously there's pros and cons for everything. But I think it's just the same then for me. We didn't, our um, digital tools weren't as available. We had the phone. I remember my dad having a satellite phone, and it was like, oh my gosh, and then um, obviously I grew up being very dependent on communications because, my mom was from Germany, but she moved to Spain and then we moved around. So her family was in Germany. My father's family was in the south of Spain. And, getting on a plane for my grandparents was something that was like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? So I think in a way, the digital world has made things better. I think for a lot of children, the digital world has improved immensely because they can learn so much that, I was not able to learn unless you live in the place. Now you can learn via, your phone, computer, whatever. But I think that either way is a way of learning, either way is progressing. And I think if you use those tools wisely, I think any form of learning and becoming immersed in an experience is the way forward. So I think the digitalism has made things much easier, and people don't have to travel. Whereas for us, it meant packing up, getting on a plane, finding a new house, going to a hotel, learning a new language, making new friends. And today, that's super easy. You don't even have to leave your house. So I think it's a huge advantage. I think, like I said before, I think any child should be exposed to as much foreign foreign entities, whether it's people, whether it's food, whether it's cultures. I think it's super important. I think having had parents from two very different cultures back then, even more. I mean, Germany and Spain is still very different from a cultural point of view, but in Europe, we're all very similar now. And obviously, with travel, things have become much easier. But still, from a mentality point of view, I think it's quite different. So I think I was lucky that I had a mother who came from a post-war Germany who was really wanting to get out and was wanting to experience and wanting to get to know. So from having her as a homemaker and pushing me always, always learning new languages, she was always very pushing me to learn, to be part of whatever child play group there was out there, whatever international relations possibility there was, she was always pushing me or us to be part of that, which obviously today is much faster and much easier. But I think no matter how you look at it, whether it's through the digital world or where it was the way it used to be, I think it's super important. I think isolating yourself is very bad in either way. But of course, everything has to be done with a certain level of caution because you can also go the other way. Um, but yeah, I think that that's sort of what has taught me to not only be very open minded, but to also really enjoy getting to know different cultures, which I'm sure also has a little bit of genetics because I know all people that are like me that have grown up with two different cultures, and that have had this similar upbringing, whether it was through my father's work, like work colleagues, or friends that were diplomats, and some of them actually really struggled and ended up not traveling at all and staying at home. So I think it's a mix of genetics and also, influence.
Yeah, that's a very good point because not everyone can cope with the continuous traveling and different cultures, and this brings as well a lot of, in some cases, trauma, and in cases, a lot of challenging how you adapt to all these contradictions and differences. So one of the things that, like you just mentioned, but it's really quite impressive, is that you not only thrive in that environment, which for anyone, especially for a child, is quite challenging, and probably because of the love you have from your parents, but as well you continue the tradition and the heritage of your father in particular, and you went as becoming as well a personality on your own and achievements in the world of film, television, and broadcasting. So tell us a bit about that education, how you start in film, and I know that film is one of your passions, and you had a fantastic background from studying with big personalities in the London film, but as well in what you're doing right now, which is very cutting edge, and will go as well through your more technical work that you do, and it's a massive events. Because for people listening to us, they never thought probably about all the complexity of
Mm.
both doing a documentary or a film and at the same time broadcasting for millions of people around the planet. So a bit of that background in film, and how did you went up becoming as well, or following in the footsteps of your father in particular?
Like I said, I went from wanting to be a veterinarian, as I'm sure many young girls do, to then my dad one day coming to me and saying, "Hey, do you want to work one summer and make some money?" And I said, "Well, of course." So he basically sent me to Germany to work for German TV as a runner, um, at the 1993 Athletics World Championships. And it was amazing because not only was I allowed to be on my own without my parents, so I was hanging out with the big kids and with the adults, but I also learned so much, and it was so much fun to be in the stadium, to feel the atmosphere. Because of my languages, I got to interview Mike Ben Johnson. I remember, who back then was like the number one track star. I got to meet Carl Lewis, which for me was like, my superhero. So I just thought, well, this is really cool. I can not only can I work in the summer and make some money, but I can also travel and, get to learn something new. So very quickly, I started insisting, and I wanted to go and work on all these events. Of course, I had school to go to, so I wasn't allowed to go to the winter games, but I ended up going to summer games and working at different events. And then eventually my father said, well, listen, what are you going to study? And I said, well, I don't want to study. I can work. Why do I have to study? And he said, well, you need to study something. And so I decided to go for film because that was sort of the second best. There wasn't really a broadcast training program or anything like that. So, and I've always wanted to do film, so I decided to go and study film, which is sort of a trick because at the same time I convinced my dad to be able to work. So I worked on the 2002 Winter Olympics. So I would go to school in the morning and then come to work in the afternoon because we lived in Salt Lake for the games. So that way I could do a little bit of both. And then afterwards, after the Olympics in Salt Lake, I moved to Athens for the Olympics there. And that's when I first became an associate producer at Athens Olympic Broadcasting, which was sort of the predecessor of OBS, which is Olympic Broadcasting Services. And then once I went to Athens and I worked there for 2 years, I decided to go back to film school in London and have another go at the filmmaking thing because I couldn't get it out of my heart. So I went to London and I decided to make a go of the filmmaking. I did get a job offer in London to work in a film production company, but then my dad called and offered me to work on the Pan American Games in Rio de Janeiro. So it was like, do I want to stay in London and be as a beginner, a runner in a production company in the cold and wet, or do I want to go to Rio and work on the Pan American Games? So I couldn't help but go to Rio. And then it sort of just, from then it just kind of, I decided to stay in broadcasting, and I started working full time for ISB, but then I also started to work full time for OBS, which is in that time period where OBS was created. And I became part of their full time staff after the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, which is when I returned to Madrid and became sort of full time OBS and ISB. But then, of course, I couldn't get rid of the film, the need for film. So it kind of became a hobby, very expensive hobby. But I made my own films. I kept on wanting to find different little projects to do films about. So I went to Nepal and did a documentary about a NGO there. I made some short films here in Madrid that I just got friends together and said, "Look, come on, let's shoot this." And I just tried to do more and more in film, whether it was with editing or shooting myself or finding projects to get involved in. So, when other people have children or start a life in other ways, I just continue making films. To this day, where then we also started mixing with a logical sort of progress, where you think, okay, we're in sports broadcasting, we have access to some of the biggest sports personalities in the world. Why not take advantage of it, and why not make documentaries about sport? Which, of course, now, about 10 years ago, sports documentaries, unless you had a football personality or you had a, famous personality, sports documentaries were kind of not very interesting. But now, of course, sports documentaries have sort of become one of the biggest commodities. So, it kind of goes hand in hand, which is what I'm trying to do for the last 5 years. We've been sort of trying to do that. So we've not only continue working in our, let's say, the normal job, which is live sports broadcasting and live sports production, but we're also doing documentaries now about athletes. So we've made one that's had quite a few awards, and is now available on some platforms for viewing, which is a documentary about a blind Spanish skier. And it was released in the movies. So, bit by bit, it's working on your portfolio. But I'm trying to combine both things because I love both sides of it. I love the live aspect, obviously, because it's adrenaline pure, when you're sitting in a TV truck or when you're at an Olympic Games, no matter how big the event, it's still very exciting, when the countdown is on, the athletes are standing at the start line and the cameras are ready to go and everybody's watching. There's an element of excitement that film doesn't give you. because obviously everything is post-produced. You can do takes over and over again. You can shoot things in a different way, and fix it in post. When you have the live element, that's it. You know, the lights are on, the cameras are rolling, and the athletes are ready to go. And once the shotgun goes off or the whistle goes off, that's it. So, so both things are very exciting, but in a very different way.
Wow, that's amazing, and congratulations for this body of work, and as well for the achievements. Because not only for people listen to us, the complexity of being a filmmaker, a producer, and as well leading one of the biggest broadcasting companies in the world is not a simple task, to say less. But as well, it's something that you continue doing, and you're doing, and thriving on it. So before I go more into your career, which there's a lot of things and questions I have here, but one of the things is definitely, and I know that your father is very special for you, personal, of course, as the daughter, but your father was as well a legend in the world of sports. So for people listening to us, so Ursula's father was Manolo Romero, that is the founder of the Olympic Broadcasting Service. And just for people that never heard about him, but probably will heard after this interview, I'll do more research and we're going to put the links. He was the founder of the Olympic Broadcaster Service, as I said, but as well the former member of the IAAF Television Commission. And I'm sure that everyone indirectly heard or saw his work, because of course he was the one that coordinated decades of work filming the Olympic Games. It was as well one of the key personalities creating and pushing the Paralympic Games, and the list goes more and more. And that is another interview almost just about him and his achievements. So one of the things, of course, that I have to speak, and I would like to hear it from your own vision and history, is tell us a bit about your father. I know that you had a wonderful relationship with him. You did as well a documentary that I think everyone should see it, and should be actually in like an Amazon Prime or Netflix, and I'm sure it will be. It's just a question of time. But tell us a bit about how influential he was, and of course as the daughter, but as well as the personality that he was, and as well legend in the sports world.
Like I said before, you know, he's it's quite impressive to think that, especially back in the day, if you think about it, but you know, in the 1960s, or the Olympics or television wasn't really, it was around, but it wasn't really something, you know, I remember my dad telling me that back then, a lot of the broadcasters would still bring their own tape machines and bring their cameras, and, you know, they would have to organize flights back and forth to bring the material, to cut it, to get it into the news. So I think one of his things that really made him so special, especially thinking that he comes from small Spain, you know, because back then, and especially in the US, I'm sure it's similar with Portugal, but people thought that we were all had chickens on the street and there was dusty roads, you know. Um, but I think he was always very forward thinking. He was, and I heard from when he was a child that he loved satellites, he loved antennas, he loved the fact that you can communicate with the outside world. He was, so his thing was really communicating, you know, from Seville. I think, you know, I think his dream was sort of connecting with aliens. I don't know, but he always loved radios. He had an obsession with, he was very much obsessed with radios, with fixing radios. His collection of old radios is ridiculous. And he always wanted to do ham radio. So he always wanted to talk to people all over the world through Morse, through, you know, whatever, different signals, whatever he could find. And also, I also found out recently that because of his last name, which is Romero Canela, which means rosemary cinnamon, that at the university here in Spain, they called him El Especies, which means the spices, but it also means that he was quite special. So back then already, he was a kind of a different thinker, um, and and he always wanted to do more. He always thought further ahead. So I think when he got involved with television, and his knowledge of English, other languages, immediately he kind of became the new talent at Spanish television, and he always pushed to do more and to become, more international. So as soon as he had the opportunity, he worked on the first games in 68, and he always thought, we need to bring the games closer to the people. We need to bring the games to the TV screens all over the world. So he really focused on that. He really focused on how can we get these pictures out there? How can we make the Olympics really a global event? And he basically pretty much convinced the IOC in one form or another, and also other federations, that television is the way forward. Um, so by creating the whole idea of a host broadcaster, which was his sort of founding idea, to say, okay, rather than having all the televisions in the world coming to the Olympics and bringing their own equipment and spending all this money and people, why don't we create something which is the world feed, which shows every athlete participating, every athlete competing in a completely non-biased way, so that then those pictures can be not only shared but also sold to different broadcasters around the world. And that way we ensure that the quality is always the same, that the pictures get there, and that everybody has a chance to get the pictures. So that way, obviously, infrastructurally, that would work. It would also reduce costs for a lot of the organizers. And at the end of the day, it would also make things easier. Plus, through satellite, through distribution, more people would be able to see the Olympics, which I think that is sort of the, it's the base of his madness back then. Now it just sounds really normal, and it sounds like, yeah, well, what, how else? But back then, in the late 60s and early 70s, television wasn't a normal thing. It was used for news, for TV programs. But to convince the organizing the Olympic movement, which was struggling back then, to convince them that TV was the way forward to save the Olympics, that was sort of his big contribution. And he managed to not only convince them, but he also managed to apply the same rules to the Football World Cup, which obviously was even easier, because the football is, every venue is the same. A football stadium is a football stadium. So, you could copy and paste, but it would make it even easier to do the distribution. Plus, football is still king, or was even more king. But the same rules he applied to football, he applied to the Olympics. And that's what made the big difference. And so between the time of 1984, where LA, like I said at the beginning, for an American sports broadcaster to bring in a young Spanish guy to run the whole broadcast operation, get involved with the budget, and change the whole operations plan, is a pretty big deal. So, ABC kind of fell in love with this young Spanish engineer, and they actually wanted to have him open an office in Paris back then. So we moved to Paris because ABC wanted to create a whole sports broadcasting section in Europe, together with the NFL, American football. Like, they wanted to start a whole thing in Europe, which failed a little bit. And then my dad decided to leave ABC and to go back to the European Broadcasting Union, which by then had listened to him and decided to create EBU Sports International, which was a company created just for host broadcast services for all European countries. So he became the chief operation of the EBU Sports International, which not only took care of the Football World Cup, excuse me, in Rome, but then also consequently the Football World Cup in the US. And then after that, he created the beginning of ISB, after the Olympic Games in the US. in 1996. And that's when he sort of said to everyone, look, why don't we come up with a host broadcasting idea, the host broadcaster, which becomes a separate company so that we don't have to go through all the bidding process. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to start from scratch and bring new people in every time. And he pitched that to the IOC. And that's when eventually OBS was created. But I think it was partially the reason for that seed to be planted was probably in 1992 for the Barcelona games, because my dad was the one who basically pushed the IOC to get involved with Panasonic. Panasonic back then obviously was a big part of creating HD cameras. And so my dad had the idea of creating a partnership between Panasonic and the IOC, which was obviously a very big deal from a business point of view. And he then pushed to have a parallel or sort of parallel production of 4:3 versus 16:9. And then the rest is sort of history, because then, HD gets involved, more and more sports in the Olympics were produced live. In 1996, there was a direct collaboration between German TV and NHK, who ran the host broadcast side in collaboration with the organizing committee and with the host broadcaster, which was also run by my dad. They created the parallel production for HD. So we had swimming, gymnastics, athletics, and a few other sports were produced both in 4:3 and in 16:9, which then sort of bit by bit moved into becoming full HD. And now the same thing is happening with 4K and 8K, of course. And between the years of 1996 and 2012, when he basically came up with the whole host broadcast concept, there was also, in parallel, he was doing tests always at the Olympics with 3D, with super high vision. He was always trying to involve any new technology. So plus he always wanted to have a view on history. So in every single international broadcast center that he would design and create, at the end of the day, he would always have a museum part where you could see the 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter cameras versus the 3D experience. And he was, up until 2012, when it was his last Olympics. In London, I think we produced a good 5 to 6 sports fully in 3D as a 3D experience. So, he was always trying to push the envelope, and he was always dedicating some of his time and effort to coming up with, to experimenting and to bringing new technologies to the Olympics. Whether they afterwards succeeded or not is a different story, but he always tried to give an opportunity and to also push for new innovations. And I think OBS still now is trying to continue with that legacy, for sure.
Well, so there's so much that you just mentioned, and it's really impressive I think, for people listening to us, the contribution to the world of sports, a world of technology, innovation, and as well, like you said, even now, for instance, I think we take it for granted, but when I start doing these things, first of all, television was being invented, and at the same time, anything that was about broadcasting sports was mostly about major sports like football and probably one or two more sports worldwide. So what he achieved, for people listening to us, it's not a small task, to say less. So I would like to, one of the questions that I want to ask, so you continue with heritage, and of course you're leading the organization it created, and you are as well innovating on that. So just for people listening to us, I think one thing people don't even probably thought about it or think about it is the complexity of filming an event like the Olympic Games, or any other event, the World Games, the Paralympic Games, the Invicto Games. I mentioned the Baku Sports Games event that you were as well involved, the Karate Games. So tell us a bit about that process, because I know that is a huge production, and for people in my podcast, a lot of people about technology and digital, but sometimes we forget how to do things and how complex it is and how people like you make it happen.
Knowing that obviously TV or nowadays streaming can influence the sport a lot. You mentioned IPC before, and that's one of the other things that my father really pushed for is, like I said before, and not only technology and dedicating some of his time and effort to taking a chance on new technologies, but he also really strongly believed that the only way to get a sport going um, is through images, through moving images to TV, because people can then, whoever cannot go to the stadium, whoever cannot see, whoever cannot feel, will be able to see that and feel that through the screen. Because at the end of the day, my father was he loved to film. That was one of his things that we had very much in common. My parents dragged me to the movies when I was 4 years old, even to movies that I wasn't supposed to see because of the. So he always he loved, for example, Leni Riefenstahl, who, as you probably know, she was the first one to ever put the Olympics on camera. But he was fascinated with the way that she um, captured the human body, the human effort. So that was his main thing. That was his. So obviously, the same theory that he put onto the screen for the Olympics, he also really wanted to give other sports and other organizations a chance. So, for example, the Paralympic Committee, he was saying to them, he was one of the ones saying to the IOC, look, you need to join forces. We need to also dedicate budget and time and effort to the Paralympics. And we need to make sure that the Paralympics are also treated the same and the Paralympics are also able to be shown on TV so that people understand what these athletes, which are, in my opinion, even more athletes and more of an effort than able-bodied athletes. But basically, I think it's just taking every sport event, no matter how big or small, is taking it as, something special, because those people that are putting themselves not only on the stage in front of the cameras, but they are giving their best and their all. For whatever reason it may be, in some occasions it's for very deep reasons that it's a healing process. But for others, it's simply their reason for being. Um, and I think it's always been in human interest to see other people performing or pushing their bodies to the maximum. So first of all, for me or for us, any process is okay. What is the sport? What do they want to see? What do the athletes represent? And what is the most important thing about that sport? What do we want to show? What do we want to show that most people with a capable eye inside a stadium cannot see? So the idea is to bring the athletes closer to the viewer, um, for us, at the end of the day, to appreciate what they're doing and also to celebrate them. Um, so, we start from that. We start from how many cameras do we need? Can we do it with one cameras, with two cameras? What are the details of the sport that we want to show? How do we show it? And then, of course, the whole process starts of going to the venue, having a look at the venue, studying the sport, looking at all the technological pros and cons that we may have at the venue. And of course, the most important thing is budget. But luckily, and this is a very good thing for today versus 20 years ago, luckily nowadays you can do a lot more for a lot less. So, we can bring the sport and the action closer to the viewer much easier. Um, But at the end of the day, no matter how many cameras and how many technological advances you have and how many toys, as I call them, jibs, cable cameras, 3D high speed cameras, whatever you want to do, at the end of the day, it's the operators and the people behind the cameras. No matter if it's a phone, no matter if it's an automated camera, at the end of the day, it's the vision of the person that's behind the camera, and it's also the vision of what you want to show. So I think the key is to have a talented crew that really care about the images, and then the rest comes. So first, it's have a look at the sport. What does the sport represent? What do we want to show of the sport? How big is the event, obviously, and how many people can we show it to? And how many people do we want to do are interested? But obviously, everything else then falls into place. And nowadays with all the technology that we have, there's really no excuse. But then obviously it depends on the scope and depends on each federation. It depends on what each sport wants to do. Then we adapt to that. And sometimes we actually we can use the event or the sporting event to test new waters. Some federations are happier than others to be able to do that. So, for example, you mentioned Baku 2015, which was the first edition of the European Games, which, as the name says, it's like the Olympic Games, but only European countries. And we did the first edition and the second edition of these European Games, and Baku was able to put a lot of budget into the operation. So we were able to really show off all the venues, show off all the athletes, and it really became a large scale operation. So we had around between 800 to 1,000 people working on things in different capacities. We started planning about a year and a half before. From going from like we are now, about 10 people in the office, to going to regular venue visits, making production plans, camera drawings, timelines, org charts, etc., to then going into full action about a month before. And that we then grow anywhere between, like I said, in Baku 2015 we had about 1,000 people working. For something as small as you mentioned before as the Karate World Championships, we have a crew of about 30 people doing it. And usually we show up about 2 or 3 days before. We install the cameras. We look after everything from logistics to cameras to specialty equipment. And in this occasion, in the last World Championships that we had in Budapest, we were lucky enough to be able to work together with ARI, which, for those of you who don't know, ARI is one of the most celebrated and well-known traditional film cameras. But of course, as every other company now, they have digital cameras and they've moved into the digital world. So we are now trying to bridge using digital traditional film cameras to be able to actually integrate them into a OB van scenario. And we managed to do that now at the Budapest World Championships, and we tested that. So we had simultaneous productions. We had a traditional live TV production with television cameras, and at the same time we had a production using ARRI film cameras, which was quite exciting. And now, more and more of these cameras are being used, just because it gives it a different feel. You can do a lot more from a lighting perspective. You can give it that sort of cinematic look, which now, interestingly enough, a lot of the big sporting organizations and broadcasters are going back to that cinematic look. So it's very interesting that going from 1936, where we had Leni Riefenstahl using 16 millimeter cameras to record the Berlin Olympics, to now fast forward, almost 100 years later, we are now using cinematic cameras again to give it that, to bring the action closer to the viewer. So I think it's very interesting how in the end we go back to, vintage to give it that beauty. So just to finish off that point, it's I think it's at the end of the day, it's super important to find the right people. You need to have your a crew, and no matter how, and probably you won't agree with this full 100%, but no matter how technological advanced you are and how many AI solutions we have, I think the human element is always very important. So, and to finish that off, like now, for example, we're preparing for the Olympics in Paris, which we are subcontracted by OBS to do the production of some of the events, especially in the Paralympics. We're going to be producing the opening and closing ceremony. We're producing the para-athletics events and also parachuting. But it's interesting that now in every sport that OBS is producing for the Olympics, apart from all the 360 VR, AI, cloud production, distribution, et cetera. But we're adding to every sport, they are adding at least one or two cinematic field cameras because they want to go back to that cinematic look.
Wow.
So, you know.
It's a masterclass in the broadcasting and in film and the history of film as well and documentary. And I completely agree with you. It's all about people. Forget the technology. The technologies keep changing, but a lot of things move and keep the same. So, well, first of all, this is a masterclass for people listening to us, and I think you can learn a lot. So, there's of course one question that I have to ask. Like you said, in the Baku European Sport Games, you actually achieve a team of 1,000 people. So this is a big economic and financial and management achievement, and as well a huge production. So tell us a bit about your side as a producer, as a manager, and as well, this is part of what I call the sports economy, and it's something that I'm going to be pushing forward in this series. But it's something that people sometimes don't forget, or forget that that's kind of when you have these events around the world, there's an entire ecosystem. And of course, you mentioned Baku, that of course it's a city, it's a country, it's a series of countries involved. There's a lot of people coming, there's people going, there's the gig economies, there's creative economy, there's a lot of different things all together. But in the end of the day, you need people to manage like you. And that's a massive achievement, to say less. So tell us a bit about that production and the costs, and as well how it's difficult. And I know for you it's simple at the same time, but putting all the orchestra together.
It all starts with a production plan. It all starts with a camera plan. And basically from there you grow. So I think from an operational point of view, like I said, I personally like to be involved from the beginning, because I have my producer hat on, I have my director hat on, and it's very difficult now that for the last 5 years, I've been the managing director, but it's really difficult for me to remove myself from the production side because I love it. But like I was saying, it doesn't matter how big the operation, at the end of the day, it starts with a camera plan. So you have a sport, you have the cameras, and then from there you start putting the rest of the pieces together. And we are, from I mean, it sounds a bit pretentious, but I was reading yesterday about the Spanish Film Awards, which is the Goyas. We had a film nominated for 3 different Goyas there. Unfortunately, we didn't win anything, but it's still nice to be nominated. But there was a lot of press around every year. It's the Academy Awards in Spain. Blah, blah, blah. But they got criticized because one of the political parties here is saying, "Oh, those people from the cinema world, they're just artists, and what do they do?" But Pedro Almodóvar, who is, very famous Spanish film director, said, "How dare you? How dare you say that we're just little, fancy people that are making movies? Because it's a huge industry. For every film, you're looking for every decent medium-sized film, you're looking at least 50, 60 people that are being paid, that are contributing to taxes, to social security. So when we do these events, I mean, like I said, the smallest multi-sporting event that we did recently was the Invictus Games in Germany, which was a very small scope in comparison to, for example, the European Games or the Olympics. But in the end, we ended up hiring almost 300 people for 2 weeks, and that is in itself quite a lot of endeavor, from an administrative point of view, from a financial point of view, from a insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So we create an economy, of course. I mean, OBS has been in Spain now, Olympic Broadcasting Services. My father decided to bring ISB and OBS to Spain, but we started out in the US. He could have stayed in the US. He could have moved to Switzerland because that's where the IOC is, and the natural progression would have gone to maybe go closer to where the IOC is. But he decided he wanted to come home, and he decided that Madrid, from a geographical point of view and also from an environment point of view, would be the perfect place for OBS to live. And over the last 2005, I think we opened the office here. Over the last 20 years, we have employed over 300, 400 people permanently, in Madrid. And a large amount of those people are local people. So, there is, obviously, we're creating jobs and there is an economy around it. So, and I'm sure in many other areas, but especially in the broadcast and the film world, there's a lot of freelance jobs. So people are very much dependent on these jobs that come and go. There's a whole database, there's a whole, like world around these freelancers that live off of these sporting events, especially football. You have every weekend, everywhere in the world, you have football games. And those football games have a minimum of 6 or 7 camera operators. Those camera operators have assistants. Those assistants have tech guys behind that are plugging in the cable, that are making sure the images go out there. So it's a huge industry, so of course, yesterday I had a meeting with somebody regarding automated cameras, which of course is going to take a large chunk of work away. So a lot of people are afraid of that, but I'm sure it'll create other jobs somewhere else, but yeah, I mean, sports is a huge, like you and I have discussed, it's a huge economy behind it. And most of all, there's people behind it, that are giving. I mean, when we have these events, you're dealing with 500 freelancers that all have their problems and all have their issues. So our HR department and our crewing department is very busy, psychologically as well, because they have to listen, everybody has their issues and problems. So I think the logistics part of an organization like this is probably the most strained and the most important at the end of the day, because it's moving people, it's moving, you're talking to people, you're moving equipment. So
Now, and I think this is something that as we go into, like you said, into the realm of AI and all the technology, becomes more and more important, because we are, first of all, bodies as well, and we still need this. But at the same time, like you mentioned, like you said, 1,000 people, it's a big town, and at the same time, there's a lot of elements of in Windows. There's the of course there's the pre-event, there's during the event, there's the post-event, but there's all the history that stays. And of course, these events create stories of cities, can renovate an entire city, can create entire economies. For instance, the Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro brought around like a couple of $1 billion, actually $6 billion plus, to the economy of the city of Rio and to Brazil at large. And each of these events are normally, especially an Olympic Games or a sports event like this, is a global event. So,
yeah, and just but just as
no,
an
please.
example, which I find very interesting, but you compare Rio, which obviously everybody, And I mean, in the Olympics, you're talking, in the Summer Games, we're talking around 5,000 freelancers, 5,000 people just going to work for the broadcast. This doesn't include the rights holding broadcasters that go anyway. This doesn't include the athletes. This is just OBS employees. So those people go and they know that they're going to go to Rio. Yes, they're going to work really hard. They, we're looking sometimes at 16, 17, 18 working hours a day. But they also know that they're going to have a lot of fun. They're going to explore the city. They're going to be there long enough so they can get a real feel of the city. So, for example, all of these people that went to Rio in 2016 were obviously also looking forward to going to Beijing 2022. But Beijing 2022 was the complete opposite of Rio because we were in the pandemic, we were all locked in, it was cold, it was winter, and everybody, actually, it's the first time that I know of freelancers that are, like I call them, event junkies or Olympic junkies because they go to every Olympics just because, that actually said no because there was not the opportunity to explore the city. There was not the opportunity to go out and meet up with other people. So they decided, why go to be locked in a hotel and work 16 hours if I can't go see the city? So that ties into what you were saying. Part of the reason why these freelancers love their job is not because they love working 20 hours a day and because they love the stress and the adrenaline. That's part of it. But because they got to go and see a new city, experience a new city, visit, go out, party, whatever. And usually they stay a little bit afterwards. So, we used to stay, my friends and I, we used to always make it an effort to stay 2 or 3 weeks after the Olympics, wherever we were, so we could travel around. So it creates a whole environment of people that are going to stay and travel and tell the story about the city and so it's a real sort of cultural exchange and at the same time, working environment, which makes it like a massive family. And one of the things that I was talking to a friend the other day, the beautiful thing about being part of the Olympic family or event family is that no matter how alone you are when you go to the city, but as soon as you have your accreditation and you go to the International Broadcast Center and you walk in, you're never going to feel alone. Never. Because you know that eventually you're going to run into somebody that you've worked with before or that or even if you go to the hotel bar at night, for dinner or whatever, you're going to meet somebody because you say, oh, you're working on the Olympics too. Great, you're my new buddy. So it's a really sort of social phenomenon as well. It's like going to university and you hang out with your buddies.
It's very inspiring, and then you are very inspiring as well on this level. So I know that we passed 1 hour, so I just want to a couple of last questions, and I'm sure we're going to do a take two because I have much more questions. So one question I have, and for people listening to us, let's so of course let's talk about your organization, ISTV, and. Give us a bit of an overview about your organization, how it works. And I think it's part of the sports economy, but I think for people listening to us, sometimes we forget the organizations behind these big events. And as well, like you said, there's the team you have, but there's as well how it grows during these events. So a bit of how it works, of course, whatever you want to share public. But I think that's an interesting one for people to know and as well to appreciate, and I'm sure collaborate with you going forward.
International Sports Broadcasting is, we're a small organization. We're 11 people. The main focus is obviously around production, but we work with any federation that has to do with sport. We work with any event that has to do with sport. Sometimes we also do other events, like some music events. We've done anything that's sort of live related. But basically, our focus is around production. So our production department is the biggest, let's say. And it all starts sort of I'm kind of a mix between, going around and looking for possible new clients or new events. I'm focused really on talking to the federations, and also a lot of the times the way it works is word of mouth. We luckily we don't really we haven't haven't really needed to go out there and do a lot of publicity, but obviously it involves also going to events such as Sportel, IBC, NAB, where all the broadcasters sort of convene. The competition is also very high. When my father created international sports broadcasting, we were the only ones. There was no other entity that was doing what we do. In the meantime, we have HBS, which is Host Broadcast Services, which looks after the World Cup. They were kind of created simultaneously. And then, of course, we have very big companies that are sort of conglomerates that started out with equipment, but then they've quickly realized that there is a need for more broadcasting out there. So they branched out and also have production side and production arms. So the competition is quite high. But I think what we are very proud of, and or at least I'm trying to push, is that we are, even though the word sounds a bit passé maybe, but we are really a boutique service. So we don't necessarily want to take on too many things, because we believe that quality is more important. I'd rather focus on doing 3 or 4 things really well. So, for example, as you mentioned before, we have a long-standing relationship with the World Games, which is, even though it's not very known, but it is actually one of the largest sporting events in the world. As the name says, it's a sporting event, and we have become their preferred broadcasting partners. So we've kind of become like their OBS, and that's sort of the thing that we would like to continue doing, is having 2 or 3 organizations that they trust us, we trust them, and we can grow together. Our prerogative is not to have 200 employees, but I think our way of functioning is to stay small, stay focused, to be creative, to really be able to help the federations grow. We're happy to take risks sometimes, meaning that we invest in the production to make it better and to help it grow. So that's sort of our functioning. We don't really want to just take on any job. We want to make sure that we create a relationship with our client, and that we become an extended arm, basically, so that we can help them grow technologically. We can help them grow creatively. And for example, now we're going to start working individually with all the federations that are part of the World Games. We've already started sending out invitations to these media workshops, where we're all going to be involved, and we're going to speak to individual media departments from these federations to talk about how they cover the events, how they cover them normally, how we can improve, how they would like us to improve, and to really create a relationship so that we can make sure they're happy. Every single sport gets the attention that they need, and every single sport feels like we're actually listening to them and hearing them. And maybe they want us to focus on showing something from an athlete that maybe we have missed because we don't know the sport enough. Or maybe we can also tell them, hey, it's great that you want to show XYZ, but we also want to think about the grandmother who's sitting at home, who just wants to watch the sport and wants to understand the sport. So we help them also focus on what is probably more important. And we help them come up with a media plan and with a broadcast plan. So we really start from the beginning, and we take it all the way to the next to their major event. So now we are starting to work on camera plans. The next step is for us to go to the next World Games city, which is in Chengdu. We're going to go a small group, and we're going to go and look at all the venues. We're going to come up with camera plans and then start growing from there and putting together the production teams. How many production teams? Where are the production teams going to be from? Are there some production teams from different countries that are specialized in that sport? So why don't we bring them in? We want to include, because obviously it's the World Games, we want to include as many different entities and different countries as possible to give it their little extra, you know. So we want to make it as global and as inclusive as possible, but at the same time, when we go to the country, we're very aware about creating the local economy and using local freelancers and local companies, to help make the world a bit more sustainable, because obviously traveling back and forth and sending equipment and is not cool anymore, and it's never been, but that was the only way forward. So by going local and really trying to push the local economy and push local giving back to the local community, is also very much part of our reason for being. So I think it's important, because there is talent everywhere, and in every town, every country, there is a television station, there is a television production company, there is a sports community. So I'm sure, we're sure that we can find local people, and if they don't have the experience that we need for a global audience, then we will make sure that they get the experience and that they get the training needed. So that's sort of our way of working.
And it's very impressive. So you touch a lot of different things, and we're going to put links to all the things that you've been mentioned. It's really an impressive career that you have, and as well, your organization is an historical one, from the work of your father to your work and the legacy that you continue, but as well all the innovation. So, one last question that I have is innovation. So you've been keeping a pace of innovation, and it's not easy because, like you said, there's like you went even to the parallel with the first big cinematographic Olympic Games with Lenny Riefenstahl, which of course is an icon of film, and as well a personality in a lot of ways, but as well technical wise, I think is still an unparalleled benchmark. So how do you see the innovation on sports, and as well as someone that has been on the cutting edge layers of filming Olympic Games, and you're still filming the Paris Olympic Games, some part of that, the World Games, which for people listening to us, we'll be talking more about it here, is really the second biggest sports modality event in the world, although it's not so well known as a lot of others. So how do you see the innovation, and how do you keep the pace? Because I know that is a tricky one in your industry.
It's very tricky indeed, especially lately. It's becoming more and more tricky, but simply because of budget. I think it's because of the technology that is available to individuals. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I really feel strongly about it that technology is available to everyone. Anyone can do their own stream, their own production. Because I've seen it, I've seen kids taking 3 mobile phones and doing a stream of a football match. I mean, it's anybody can do it now, but I think it's to be in parallel with all the technology that's available is choosing the right technology, and choosing the right technology for the right purpose. So I think, for example, in the case of the World Games, yes, it is the second largest multi-sporting event in the world, multi-sporting event, because you have the World Cup, which is obviously bigger. But it's the largest multi-sporting event. And because of that, it creates a huge complexity. I mean, there's more than 30 different types of sports, varying from indoor sports to, power boating, to complex sports that involve going through a forest, orienteering, which are very difficult to cover, no matter how much technology you have. So for us, it's very important to have a look at the overall picture and to really decide which sports, are more important as far as audience goes, where you have the capacity to show small details of the sport that normally are not able to be shown, but there's sports that people know. So, for example, gymnastics. Gymnastics, everybody knows. Everybody has seen gymnastics at one point or another. And for the Olympics or for a big broadcast, you will have cameras that are focusing on the feet, cameras that are focusing on the hands, and that give you super slow-mo replays, and you see the expression, and you see the eyes, and you see the calculation, and then you see the movement of the athlete, and you see every single trajectory line that can be then through technology be shown. But at the end of the day, you're still trying to show a person doing something incredible with their body. So I think technology helps, of course. Technology gives you a different point of view. Technology is great for people that are experts in sport because they can really delve into it. But I think, and this is what I think is very fascinating, at the end of the day, all you need is one camera that shows what the person is doing. So, which brings in the whole automated AI technology. But it's hard to assess which sports deserves what, because obviously each federation is going to go, well, my sport isn't as important, and why not get the technology? But I think it's a fine balance between finding technology that's actually going to make our life easier as a host broadcaster, looking at budget, because what technology is doing is helping with the budget a lot. But then also assessing on the quality and the end of the output quality. And I think that's where innovation and technology can help, but I think you can fall a little bit into the trap, because at the end you still need the human eye and the human touch behind it. So yes, can you use technology? Of course. Can technology make it better? Yes, but to what price? Because there's also technology which helps with the budget, but then the quality might go down. But then if you really want to use technology to really make it interesting, like they are able to use at the Olympics, but you're talking at very high price. So a lot of the events that happen around the Olympics do not have the budget that the Olympics have in order to do these tests, in order to use technology. So I think it's a little bit like going from film to television to 16:9 to 4K. Of course, technology is great, but I think it is our job, to assess and to recommend the right technology to the different federation depending on what they want. And there is a lot of new technology out there which makes it so much easier. But at the end of the day, when you want good quality, it's something that is still sort of up in the air. So I'll be very interested to see how it goes. But we are ourselves looking at using different types of technologies for different levels of sport, for the World Games, which I think will help us and also will help the different federations to be able to see their pictures, because we'll be able to transmit, and to stream sports that haven't had pictures before, or qualifiers, or different parts of the sport that haven't been able to be seen before.
It's a very, very good point, and that in itself it's a big thing. So I want to be grateful for it because I took quite a lot of your time. So it's been an honor, and there's a lot of things that open to a lot of questions, and we are friends as well. So I will definitely create a series of interviews around sports economy, sports broadcasting, sports technology, and sports innovation and cultural, because like you touched, there's some elements. In the end of the day, it's about people. So last thing is, tell us about where people can find about you, about your organization, about the things you're doing, about your films as well, because like you mentioned, I didn't touch too much on that one because that's in itself another podcast. But I would like to for people to learn more about you, and we'll promote you a lot in the digital world because ironically you're quite famous, but sometimes on the digital there's not so much that they can find about you.
And like I said before, we're all about word of mouth, and it's worked quite well so far. But we do have our own website, which is being worked on right now because we're adding our ISB Films side. But the website is isbtv.es, and soon you'll be able to see our isbfilms.es on there, where we're talking about the films that we've recently been involved with. Of course, I'm also on Instagram and all that, but I'm not a very big into social media. But yes, we have our website, we have Instagram, I don't think we have Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. And tomorrow, actually, we're heading off to the Berlin Film Festival, where we're going to launch officially ISB Films, and we're going to present it to the international film world. So I think we're going to get an article at Variety magazine, which is a very big international publication around film. And we're going to be promoting one of our new film productions, which is a Polish, UK, Luxembourg, French co-production, which hopefully will be sold and screened very soon. But we're also going to be taking our Invictus 2023 documentary out to the world, and we'll start submitting it to festivals very soon. It's also going to be distributed to quite a few theaters around the world. And we are now also working on some new projects with ISB Films, not only with sports stories, but also other stories. So I think our website is going to be a little bit more interesting because it'll have the film aspect. And yeah, hopefully we'll get more films underway, which I'm trying to focus on. We're also hopefully going to be working together with the Mumbai Marathon for a documentary series, I hope, which I'm very excited about. And the next big thing that we're working on is the Indigenous Football League, which is something that I'm very excited about. And we are going to be doing the streaming of this first pilot event. But the idea is to create a whole platform and joining all the indigenous tribes around the world to play football. And that was launched officially yesterday at the Carnival. Oh, not yesterday, sorry, on Sunday in Rio. So that's sort of the next few things that we're doing.
Well, that's a lot of things. So thanks, first of all, congratulations for a fantastic career, for all the achievements, for your creativity and the weight that you brought to the industry. So we'll do a second stage. For people listening to us, please research Ursula, research ISB and all the work, fantastic work that has been done, as well research about her father, about their films, and you're going to put all the links here. So hopefully this is just a principle of a digital as well interaction that you're going to have here, because you will be a special guest and a lot of more things. Thank you all, and thank you, Ursula, for being here.